We're here in the home of Wade and Vivian Hayes. It is July the 12th, 2001, and our purpose is to start the interviews to preserve Sarah Hayes Packard's history. And we figured that Wade and Vivian would know the most, so we start with them. I have a rough outline, and we'll follow some of that. But I guess we'll just get started. Wade and Vivian, before we get into the specifics of Sarah's childhood and her life, we'd like to know something about her roots, beginning with her relationship to William Williamson. And if either one of you could, in a nutshell, tell the William Williamson story and how Sarah was connected to that.
Well, William Williamson, of course, was the first pioneer in this area. He came over here after the Civil War and settled down, homesteaded, and by and by raised all of his family. Part of them, a few of them in Louisiana, and most of them here. And of course, farming was the way that everyone made a living, and that was very humble circumstances. Pioneer in the fullest sense. And William Williamson and Joycine Demerits were just that said couple. And from them descended many children, one of which was my grandfather, Jasper Williamson by name. He married Mary Jane Baker first, and then he had another marriage later. But Mary Jane Baker was sickly. In those days, they didn't have good doctors, they didn't have good medicine, and she passed on after 3 children. My mother was number 2. Margaret Williamson, or Maggie they called her. She married Ellis Raymond Hayes back in 1914. And consequently, from them, they had 6 children. Wade, myself being the oldest. And then thereafter, 5 other children. And Wade, of course, was married in 1939 to said Vivian Church. And from that marriage, I will make a little introduction to a thought that occurred with respect to Sarah at this point in time. That gives you a little bit of her roots, geographically and also genetically. Geographically, they lived here. And so, before Sarah was born, in our early days of marriage, we didn't know much about health, nutrition, or physical fitness. And in one sense of the word, Vivian, or Grandma as we call her, was not too well. She miscarried early in the marriage. And subsequent to that, we had a stillborn child. And
One year later. It was 1 year later.
Well, the 1 year later. And we had prepared the baby bed with great anticipation, because we looked forward, as any joyous parents would, to a little child. But we lost that one. And therefore, we were child conscious to the nth degree. And by, Vivian got pregnant with little Sarah.
2 years later.
And 2 years later. And we were so concerned and even worried and grieved because we were afraid that it might happen again. So we went to our current mission president and asked for a special blessing. And if I ever heard a man plead with the Lord, knowing our circumstances by explanation to him, he pleaded with the Lord that we might have a child, a live child. And we took a lot of heart in his blessing. We didn't understand a lot about it, even blessings then. But all we knew is that we had hard luck. And that was part of our adversities and trials. And we call it strong tribulation. But by and by, the Lord blessed us with little Sarah. And we didn't even have a comfortable automobile to take Vivian to the doctor. But we borrowed our neighbors, which is a relative, my great uncle, and his wife, Aunt Sadie. And Uncle Cal was a jovial person. And when he found out that Sarah was born, a bouncing baby girl instead of a boy, he said, well, Wade, you're still boss. And we took that semi-seriously. But that was the beginning of Sarah. But at the early on stages of little Sarah, there are a few things that were extremely significant about little Sarah, even from day one. She had the brightest little eyes, little dark, piercing eyes, and that radiated from her bodily countenance. That was the most, for now she said, a very pug nose at the time. It finally grew out to be normal, but it was little pug nose. And that was noticeable, but we loved her with a passion. And so,
your glasses
I
have a
don't
little
remember this
reflection.
about her birth was.
Take your glasses off if you can see it all without them.
okay, oh, I can.
Lights.
I do well without the glasses.
Oh yeah, because you. Can
So
see
anyway, it was very noticeable in the early stages, and of course we tended to her and this and that and the other in a normal fashion, and our grandma did most of the tending, but I was working hard trying to find a way to make a decent living, and engaged in that endeavor. But grandma did most of the tending and caring for and teaching, training, motivating all through the years. And I was off in doing church work more than I should, I guess. Even though it was church work, I think I would have done well to do more things with the kids. But I did have, with all of our 4 children, I had a love. I could not define it. I could not describe it. And I did not put the time, but that love was a passion, that I loved the little children. And so I did have that virtue, if you want to call it a virtue. But she had those piercing eyes and beautiful child. I can still see her as a little baby in my imaginary mind, how piercing those eyes. But I'll hasten to say that those eyes, to me, and even to this day, reflect that she had a high, not only IQ, from the very beginning, but she had a spiritual feeling that radiated from her countenance through her eyes. So her eyes were, she had never looked sluggish child, a sleepy child, was wide awake, enthusiastic from the day one. And wherever she went thereafter, whatever she did, and Mother will tell you some other things, but you'll see that Sarah Hayes was that type of an individual at an early age. And then we know the story henceforth. So I'll turn the time to Grandma and let her say a few things about her. And that takes care of her geographical history, and it takes care of her genetics through family, and also early days.
There's a few things I want to ask you. This story has been told a lot of times, but would you briefly tell the William Williamson conversion story?
Well, there's a lot of ways to tell it. And in substance, it all amounts to the same thing. Whether or not these precise words were used, we'd say somewhat like Brigham Young when he get to Valley. This is the place, drive on. Well, you've heard those words. He could have said it a little bit different, but it meant precisely the same thing. And it's the same way about William Williamson. Apparently, the Lord had prepared him over in Louisiana. His faculties of mind, he was, as the saying goes, my sheep know my voice, and they will not follow a stranger. It's a beautiful parable in the Bible or statement. And he was just that such a person, prepared. And maybe not Joycine, even though she was faithful to the core, and she it was reflected in one of the mission presidents who was out here, went back to Salt Lake in General Conference, talked about Joycine DeMerit's, her faithfulness. But William Williamson, to me, was the one, the little short guy that could walk on his hands. He was probably prematurely older than would catch the eye, but he had never really joined any church. And when he first encountered or interacted with the two missionaries that came here, he had that spirit of acceptance, which is the blood of Israel. And he used that expression. Them are my boys. And this is a true church. This is a church I want, or I will embrace.
Them is my men.
Them is my men. And verbally, he might have used it in correct language, but a beautiful principle prevailed in his acceptance. That's all I remember about it. I can just see him in my visionary mind. I can see him when he looked at in that direction. He saw him coming down the road with their big hats and black coats and whatever. But he accepted them. He didn't question that. He didn't slam the door. It was a total conversion, in a sense, the way I see it.
Tell me, what was the church like when Sarah was born here in Williamson?
Well, it had growing pains. Let's use that. In early days of the church, missionaries would do well to convert and bring into the church one single person. And that might be through a part-member family, where their husband or the wife would finally be coaxed to join the church. And they would do a lot of fellowship and play ball or anything they could do to build up the teaching situation. But when we had celebrations, outings, they were just as real and enthusiastic and fun as they are today in a different natural modern setting. In those days, we were just as live at a rodeo, or we were just as live in horse racing. I still remember standing out on the road down on Sally Hill whenever the horse races would take place, and Millie and Orland, for example, would ride those horses. I just got a thrill that intrigued me.
How many members?
And well, we would have about a half a dozen priesthood, Melchizedek priesthood members, week after week, year after year, and we would chew on some of the little problems local. that maybe it would take us a year to get a sign out in front of the church. We want a Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints sign. But we had an old chapel, and they did the little practical things. They all knew we had to have a building, so everybody pitch in. And when Sarah was little, she was not devoid of the conventional programs of the church, the primary and all. So she got a pretty good, part of that in her early days. She was not denied the primary and MIA relief side, even though there were quite a few in the organization. And we call it MIA then. And young men and young women, Boy Scouts, offenders, explorers, and what have you.
How many members of the branch would customarily attend?
Well, when we were organized in 1953, we had 120. That's the population of the attendance at the ward. Williamson was a branch with about 120.
How many would attend?
Well, we had a pretty good attendance. We had built up, and Sylvia had up to about 75. So our geographical wards and branches then were very few. Orange had very few, just a handful. They call it a Sunday school. And finally, they organized a branch with Earl Hilton as the first branch president. Well, I remember that. I was there. But anyway, I think that even though we were crude in our early days and did things unconventional, that Sarah and the children, our children, because we had other families that had young families like the Forties, and it gave us a strength, just like you're going to do out at the Packard plantations. And that's the way I see it. Now, Grandma may put in a little different view, but I see it that way. I watched it pretty close.
Let's talk
and
about
answer your question.
Oh, yeah. Let's talk about you. Your great-grandfather was William Williamson?
Yeah.
And so you were obviously born and raised a member of the church. Were you active all of your life as a young boy?
No. There's several reasons for it. I don't blame my father. I don't blame my mother, even though my father was around there. The first 20 years, I will tell you up front that I would sit on the back so they would not call on me to pray. I never uttered a prayer in public, in the church, or in public for 21 or 2 years. I never read a book in school because my folks did not coach me or encourage me, not because they didn't have the interest at heart, but because in their traditions, they didn't have but about a 5th or 6th or 8th or 9th grade education. And they didn't know. And even then, they didn't go full year. And so they had to scoop up a little education by experience, learn to write. And that's the main thing. So they didn't know to study at home, take a book at home, even though the teacher would say, well, we want you to study. So I didn't study. I didn't read a book till I was about 21 years old, because my folks did not encourage me to go to church. I would go when I were here. I'd go to church, to MIA or Sunday school, but I was not considered active. They never approached me to give me the Ronnie priesthood even. They just didn't. And they never approached me to give me the Holy Melchizedek priesthood till I was in the early 20s prior to my true conversion. Now, I always believed in the church, subconsciously and consciously, and I loved it. And I didn't, but I was not active. I went to school and had fun, and I went into show business, and that's a long ways from the religious life. But when I was converted in my early 20s, it was gung-ho. The rest of my life, I was like Paul, I'd say, if I can use that boastful term, that 60 plus years, 65 years, But I've been a member, theoretically, I've been a member 86 years, and that's my current age.
Well, tell me about your true conversion then. What happened? How did it happen?
Well, it was kind of gradual. When in show business, I looked around and I don't know whether the Lord was working on me. I feel like He was. I looked around and I saw the show people. I said, this is not what I want. Subconsciously, I wanted a wife and children and family. And I hadn't even thought too much about a religious life, except that between seasons when I got off out of show business, it was easy to go to church because they had attractions. I can be thankful with all my soul for the fact that they had an MIA program, and a very active one in El Dorado. And I'd go because they would invite the family, and then I had fellow family members that would take us to the socials, MIA socials. Nobody can appreciate it more than I can, because that was a draw, a magnetic draw, and I gravitated toward that invitation. And then when I got in, and you get around the gospel, it's like going into a flour mill. When you go to a flour mill, you're going to get it all over you. And that's the way it did me, and it just saturated my mental faculties and my goals and ideals. It all harmonized, and it wrote me a little preliminary ideal plan of life. And I can show it to you today, and it'll tell you that Brother Hayes pretty well followed that, and it was not a patriarchal blessing force, but it was an addendum to it. And I followed that, and I believed it, and it was your instincts give you the surge to go forward. So that was a true conversion. And I read in the Bible. I'm not a reader of the scriptures. I wasn't taught in all those areas righteousness. But I read in the Bible one time in a sacred experience. I lifted my aspirations upward heavenly, and I said, I want to know if the Lord was there. I just always wondered that. And I read a little bit, and I got a little bit of spiritual rejuvenation, and I said, internally, I didn't verbalize. I said, are you there? And the Lord answered me. He showered me with a sweet spirit. And one it's the sweetest spirit that I ever had. You know, it was not only comforting, but it was tangible. Like electricity converted to righteous, heavenly feeling. And he was saying, yes, I'm here. Even though I didn't make a turnaround right then, I never forgot it. Got it on record. And those are kind of things associated with conversion. Early days, whenever you weren't a seasoned individual up here. You hadn't had the years and decades behind you. You just were early on in your life grasping for something important. And it turned out to be, and I understood that way from early days. I understood 65 years ago, hey, this is what I wanted. This is it.
You mentioned that you were in show business, and you sort of looked around and decided you wanted something better than what they had. What kind of business were you in? What did you do? Where did you travel? Tell us about that.
Okay. First place, my father, like father, like son. My father was a tap dancer. He could dance, and because he played the fiddle, we call it the fiddle, not the violin, because he played and dances. He was the life of the party, and of course that appealed to me as a son of my dad, and I watched every move he made. And when he had danced, I'd want to dance. And I want to try. And we had no formal teachers whatsoever. All we had to do was just practice, do our self-training. So whenever he got to dancing, little as he did, I wanted to monkey see, monkey do. I wanted to mimic what he did. As a little kid, I've seen little kids, yours, all of them want to dance. And I was one of those. And I started shuffling and dancing. And as I got older, I got somehow instinctively, you can practice anything, you do a little better. Home talk, private talk. And so I got good enough to think that I could aspire to become a professional dancer, even without lessons. So I had vain enough, or at least I had an ambition to be a professional dancer. So one time, a little country show, in those days, in the Depression years, it was hard to make a dime from the 30s to the 39, somewhere in there. It was all depression for most people. Severe depression in a few years. But when the little show came into town in Smackover, Arkansas, my brothers and sisters and all of us went to it on Friday night. They had the concert. They had the talent show.
Were you here or in Arkansas?
I was in Arkansas. I dilly-dallied back from Arkansas to Texas because I hitchhiked back and forth. I didn't have a car.
How old were you?
Oh, about 19.
Okay.
Anyway, I would go, I got to be pretty good on dancing, even though no formal training. And I was about 160 pounds or 69. As strong as an ox, but could dance all over. Consequently, they had a concert, or they had a talent show that every Friday night to draw local people. I entered the contest. And they got it by acclamation. The winner would get by acclamation, and I won the prize. And the manager of the Davis Brum Comedian show, his wife was more or less for the hands, and she was the boss. But she called me backstage and says, "Hey, would you like to travel with our show?" It was a repertoire show. In other words, 3-act dramas and vaudeville acts between. They said, "We'd like for you to dance between." And I said, "Oh yeah, I'm footloose and fancy free." I didn't sleep a week that night, but my brothers would applaud, the sisters, they would applaud on my behalf so loud that I won the contest, whether I earned it or not.
Packard style.
Packard style. We just supportive with acclamation. And so that's the way I got into show business. It just drifted into it. It just like a leaf on the current. I just here it went, and I went with them, and they liked me, and I liked them.
Tent show.
A tent show. How long were you in that business?
2 seasons. Well, a summer season. They couldn't travel in the wintertime; it's too cold. So they went through the summer, and they would stay up 1 week, and then move on over the weekend. And you'd ride on the big top, the big truck, our truck, and put big bundles of canvas all over. They'd break it down, and they knew how to drive the stakes. And whatever, they knew all about. They call it the boss canvasman. He was a canvas specialist, and he supervised tearing down and putting all the seats in there, putting the stage up. So I doubled on that. They saw fit to put me to work. Very little pay, but I was getting opportunities to move up in the show business. They tried me on little dramatic parts and bits and pieces, and I did poorly, but I did all right in dancing. And they call me guest artist when I go to, say, Fort Smith, Arkansas, or somewhere for the winter quarters. I'd go down and dance on the, show. And I'd get encores. Because they liked the young, skinny young man that could move his feet. They liked to hear the noise. I had one grand talent that put me over, not because I had hand movements, ballet, or professional look at all. I just had feet. But I knew rhythm. And I could feel rhythm. And I knew that from day one when I was a little boy.
He didn't have any.
So I didn't have a profession. I didn't have a trade. I had never, and when I was ready to marry, I came out of this business, and I couldn't drive a nail, so to speak. I couldn't square up a board in my early 20s now before I got married. I didn't have a trade, never read books, never prayed in church. It's never, never, never. I was the most blank person, but the gospel changed all that. Now I have more records, if I can say it in a boastful tone with a little humility. I don't think there's anybody in the 11 million members of the church that have as many personal records as Wade Hayes.
I believe it.
I've been told that I do. Okay, well, now you have that. I didn't know you were getting on out of Sarah onto Wade.
Can't know everything about Wade until you know something about their folks. Grandma?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Tell us, if you will, where you were born, your parents, your roots, as much as you want to tell us about that.
Okay. I was born in 1918 in Trastwood, Arkansas. And at that time, I think my dad was doing the best he ever did in his whole life. They had a farm, and at that time they had already got rid of the farm. And he was working in timber. And my sister had the whooping cough. One just 2 years old when I was born. Older had the whooping cough. So I was born with a whooping cough in my face. And I took it as soon as I could. So Mom said it was a real struggle for 6 months because whooping cough, they didn't know what to do with it. Just think I'm going to not make it. It was a struggle to get it. And Mom always thought because I had such a horrific entry into the world that I was more sickly than Olta was. And I believe that she was sort of robust as far as energy and health, more so than me. But in coming up, I do remember that we were poor, and Daddy went from timber. At first, he was working in timber, and he would measure. They call him a scaler. And he sharpened saws and went from job to job in the woods, sharpening saws. And so then he got into the oil whenever the oil was discovered in El Dorado. Well, it so happened that Wade and I lived not too far apart as little children, but didn't know it. We were both in the El Dorado oil field. And so we had a little shotgun house, and we had lived in a place called Lumberton. And
that's Lumberton, Arkansas.
Lumberton, Arkansas. Uh-huh. This Lumberton in Texas is probably named for it because I think this oil field came out after that one did. And my first memories are in Lumberton, where I remember my first snake. And that was my first memory. Oh, and I followed the kids off into the woods and to play, and so they didn't know that I was coming, and I was toddling along, and then they turned around and saw me, and I thought they were going to be glad to come pick me up and something, and they started screaming, and so it turned out I didn't know to be afraid of snakes, but I was afraid because of the way they acted. And so then we moved away from there when I was 3. And then that's my next memory, the day we moved to El Dorado. And I was sitting in an old tire swing, and I was going up and down and letting the cat die, spinning around, making myself sick, wanting to go in the house. Mama wouldn't let me in because they were trying to get things straight. Mama was irritated. I couldn't understand why she was so irritated when here we were and moved to this big city. You know, we ought to all be happy. We lived there until I was 6, and then that. And at that time, what Daddy was doing was working with horses. And we had horses, and there was a barn close to our house. I guess he had rented it. And he kept his horses up there. And he used them to pull people out of the mud because there wasn't any paved streets or gravel streets even. And they were going out and drilling these wells, you know, in marshes and things, and going in, I don't know that they were going, I saw my first car there in El Dorado, but I don't think that it was cars that they were pulling out of the mud. I think it was other horses and other wagons, and they were hauling these pipelines and things like that on them. And so I had my first friend. Her name was Jimmy. No, my first friend was Lois. And I was so thrilled to find a friend. And Mama, raised me, I guess like I raised mine, like Sarah raised hers, is, just run wild and come back and eat at mealtime. So I was in the woods and by myself, and I heard someone singing, so it kind of frightened me a little bit, but I kept listening, and it didn't sound like anything bad. So I went back. I said, "Hey," or something. I called out to them. She called back to me, and I went up there, and she was making a playhouse out of pine straw, and so I joined her and played, and we had a wonderful time. And my heart just overflowed with love for her because this was my first friend. And Olga, my sister, who was 2 years older than me, did not accept me in her social group. And so I didn't have a close relationship with her. And so Lois and I were very, very close. And so then there's no story, but I do want to tell it. Then I made friends with another little girl. His name was Jimmy. And we walked up the street to Hayes grocery store. And so Mom would send me, by that time I was 6 years old, and she'd send me to the store with a note sometimes and whatever. But anyhow, Jimmy and I were at the store. And there was a gum machine there. And so when we came out, we were wishing that we could have a penny that we could put in the gum machine, but knew that we didn't. And she says, "You don't have to have a penny." Said, "You can pick up a little bitty rock, a little slick rock, and put it in there, or else you can get one of the corks out of a Coke lid, soda pop lid, and stick in there, and that's just a machine. It's not a person. You can't see it. He thinks it's a penny. So we got busy real quick, and we hunted all of, the flat rocks we thought would go in there, and the coke lids, and nothing. We didn't fool the machine. It never coughed up any chewing gum. So we left, and next day or so, met my sister Olta, and she said, "Guess what?" And we said, "What?" She said, "There's a $25,000 reward for Vivian and Jimmy for messing up the gum machine." And I said, "Oh no." She said, "They're going to put y'all in jail." And so I was so scared, and I ran home and I crawled under the bed. And there was a little curtain on where Mom kept the meat, and she just had it on a salt meat, and it was under a table, and she put a curtain around it so you couldn't see the meat under there. And I crawled under there first and got in the meat, the salt meat. But that was too uncomfortable, so I snuck out and got under the bed. And so pretty soon Mama came, "Vivian, Vivian." And so I said, I didn't respond at all. She said, "Now, where could that kid be?" And says, but I think she knew where I was now. But she kept calling, "Vivian." And so she said, "Now I don't know where she is. She's the only one that will go to the store for me when I need to go. Need her to go without fussing. She's always the best one." Now I realized that was, I thought I'm just hearing her think, but what she was trying to coax me out from under the bed. She knew I was in trouble, and but I didn't come. I didn't crawl out. I stayed under there, and she let me stay until I got ready to come out. And so I snuck around for a while, and then the cops never did come. And so we weren't in prison, so we went back to the store. And I had some money this time. And so I made my purchase for Mom. And when I came back out, I had a penny, so I put it in the gum machine. And it wouldn't cough up anything. And so I went in and told the store man. I said, "I put a penny in there and it didn't give me." And he said, "Some kids came around messing with my machine, messed it all up." He went in and hit it and hit it and hit it. And out came one. If it's wrapped in a green wrapper, you get a whole stick, not a whole stick, but a package of gum. And so I wanted my package of gum. He gave it to me, and I went home. But I had such a guilty feeling about that, about me trying to steal from the gum machine. And I never did tell Mama about it until I was 12 years old. And I said, "I never did tell you about this, but I think I was afraid. I didn't know what in the world you would do to me, if you did know. But I think that my punishment was a lot greater, because I think you would have comforted me some, and let me know something about it. But the feeling that I had, I never wanted to feel that again." Anyway, I diverged to tell that little story. That's part of my story.
What was your religious upbringing as a kid?
Yeah, as a young child, Mama never went to church, and but she was religious. But I think she didn't go to church because she didn't have a nice dress, or for some reason. And Daddy wasn't. She was only 16 when she married, and Daddy was not religious at all. So she didn't want to go by herself, and she didn't send us. But when I was about 8 years old, I started going to the Baptist church, which was close by, close enough. And had a Sunday school teacher there that I fell in love with. And this is my story about feeling Jesus close to me, John. Okay. And so this teacher told me how much Jesus loved me. And she said he is always with you. And he'll always be with you if you want him to be. And so I went home that day and walked in by myself. And I decided to take a shortcut through the woods. And by a ravine, we called it, where water, a drainage ditch, and was along there, but the trees were beautiful in the spring. And so I was walking along, and my heart was just glad. And I was thinking about Jesus is here, is with me. He's walking right here beside me. And I said, okay, Jesus, you walk on the path and I'll walk in the weeds. And so I stepped out of the path and I walked along with Jesus by my side through the woods that day. And I had a very feeling of closeness to him that day. Anyway, that was my first church experience. Then we went to the Christian church. Mama, then she would never go to Baptist church because she just did not like Baptist. And but she liked Methodist, okay. And she had gone to the Christian church before my day.
That's sort of a non-denominational, or
no, this was. We went to the Christian church, which we had to travel all the way across town to get to it. And it was real dull to go. And they would have the sacrament. They passed the plate. They passed the plate to take up collection. You're always supposed to put something in it. And then they would pass the bread and wine. The Christian took it quite often. I think they never took it every week. Baptists would hardly ever take it. They had the closed communion, I think. Nobody but members went, and it was the night. Nobody knew when it was. I never saw the Baptists take sacrament. And and during this time, though, my dad had developed a severe drinking problem. And he was getting drunk a lot, and I could tell how happy that made my mom. And so I know whenever I'd see him come home drunk, well, I would be sick at my stomach at that time. He was never mean to us, but he was sick. And one time he was in there dancing. He wanted to dance while he was drunk. Never wanted to dance any other time. And so he danced with my sister, Opie, and she would laugh, thought it was funny. And they'd dance, and they'd play that old country music. And Ida Red was one of them. Said, Ida Red, Ida Blue, I'm just going Ida too. And he'd say, hot dog! and they danced, and he'd go sleep. And but all that made me sick. And I said, I want one thing. I promised myself. I said, will never drink alcohol, liquor. And when I was in third grade, that we had a person from Women's Christian Temperance Union called WCTU come and speak to our school and talked about the sorrow and the misery that drinking causes. And I was so touched, and she would talk about men going staggering home while the women and children were, huddled in a cold house, wishing for food. And so she said, now, I want to encourage all of you to make up your mind right now that you will never be tolerant of liquor. Never taste it. If you don't ever taste it, you'll never be addicted to it. And said, how many of you, I want you to make a vow. And the vow was, I will never buy, taste something or give alcoholic liquor while I live. I will never touch it, in other words. Buy, sell, taste, or give alcoholic liquor while I live. So I took that vow and I kept it. And that was one of the measuring rods that I had about young men, that I said I will never be interested in a man that drinks. A man that drinks to me is an animal. He's not a man. And I would rather be an old maid all my life than marry a man that drank. And I think that vow that I might took was the thing that led me to Wade Hayes. Because that was one thing Betty Francis, who was his employer at the time, had told me, says, you need to meet him and he needs to meet you, because I know you would not touch an ounce of liquor and he wouldn't either. And so we finagled a meeting, But went to school, and I was a little underweight kid, skinny. And actually, the school gave me milk at recess. The poor kids they get milk at recess, and I was one of those. And I even though I was ashamed to take it, it sure did taste good. And I drank it down. Then at about 12 years old, Daddy, there was a movie actress, a Miss America that came from Pamela, Arkansas. And she got religion out California. She won Miss America. And then she was asked to come to Hollywood. And so while she was there, she married one of the movie directors. They tried to put her in movies, but she really wasn't good. But she was gorgeous, beautiful. And so she married him in Amy's Temple. She went to Amy Temple McPherson's temple, and they called it Amy's Temple in Los Angeles. And she got religion there. And so it caused a separation between her and her husband. She had a child, came back to Pine Bluff, and began to preach. And that was in, I guess, probably about 1930, something like that. And so Daddy, and she was preaching in a little old church, little old one-room store building. And of course, no air conditioning. I guess they had electric lights. We didn't have them at that time. But Daddy heard about it. Of course, he wanted to go see her. And he went, and then he wanted to get religion. And Mama was not so sold because she was teaching Pentecost. And so Mama wasn't that excited about. She thought she belonged to a Christian church, and that was her faith of choice. But she said, I'll go to church anywhere Otis will go to church because he needs it so bad. So she went with him there. And so she got Pentecost religion. And every now and then, I'll say this, Daddy would get it again. He'd backslide. He would come in and he would sing in the choir, had beautiful bass voice. And he loved to sing in the choir. And then he would get back to drinking again, and he'd backslide. And then he'd have to come back and repent again. And so he was in and out the rest of his life. Never. But he paid tithing. And so Mama started, and that was the beginning of Pentecost Church in Pine Bluff. So when I was 12, I joined it and got the Holy Ghost. And was really religious.
Did you all speak in tongues?
Yeah. And the way they do that is they get here, kneel at the altar, and pray. and ask the Lord to say, to give you the Holy Ghost. And then you say, glory, 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 and then you start jabbering, and that's it. You got it, you know. So, but I did have an experience there one time as I was praying at the altar, and I don't even know if I should I tell this? Okay.
Definitely.
So I told Wade about it later, and he was the only person I think I told. But as I was there kneeling.
Hold on just a second. Let's, we've only got 5 minutes left on this tape.
Oh.
Can you tell?
I can finish.
Okay.
As I was kneeling there, well, I seemed to kind of become unaware of everybody around me, and I visualized. I could see this, like I'm telling you, whether I saw it or whether I just visualized it. But I saw myself kneeling at the foot of some steps, and I knew I was praying to know Jesus. And so but there was the steps went like this, and then like this. There was a landing here, and then there were steps up here. But all I could see here was that I could see this light down here at the landing. And so I crawled up the steps to there, and then I could see up into the full light. And when I made the turn, and I could see that full light, and I always thought that there would come a time in my life when I would have more light. And so that was, I guess I was about 13, maybe, not even that much. Well, I was 12 when I joined, so I guess it was about 13. And so then I came up the rest of the time in Pentecost Church until I met Wade. And do you want to tell anything more?
Well, I remember you telling me a story about a picture that you saw that ultimately had an impact on your.
Oh, yes. And when I was 16, it was kind of the fad then for the young Pentecost kids to go to a Bible school where you would live on premises. It was like a Bible college. And so I stayed away from home that year and went to Enid, Oklahoma, and lived in the dormitories. And so every morning we would have, what do you call it when it's a devotional? And they'd go in and they'd have a service, someone would sing and all kinds of stuff. And they'd be speaking in tongues and doing things. But it was a lot of the oral, like BYU, as far as, super religious, everybody. And so as we would leave the chapel, well, right over the door of the exit there, well, they had a great big mural, and it was a picture of hell, and they had this great big pit, and all of the flames shooting up, and then they had people in there screaming and crying, and then they had people falling in, and people, it was a real gruesome thing. And then the writing on it said, millions of people are going to hell because you did not pay your missionary fund. And I said, that is not right. Why should they go to hell because I didn't pay my fund? I'm the one that ought to be in hell if it's that bad, And I said, that can't be. Why should they? That's not fair. And I never did get that out of my mind. And then there was another incident that.
Let's change the tape.
Okay.